Heidi-ho. One of the interesting things about the kind of society that we live in, a capitalist society, is that it's constantly changing. It's not like feudal societies in bygone ages, where very little changed economically, politically, socially, technologically. The kind of society we live in has a kind of internal momentum to it that drives it forward. There's always change occurring. A good example of this from recent times is a segment on Media Watch on ABC television, which talks about structural changes that are occurring within the media in Australia. This is a nice little example of dynamic structural change occurring within the economy that has important implications for our society and the political system that we put up with, or that we live with. The most important change which has occurred here is a technological change that has been pervasive, and that is the emergence of the internet, of course. So what has happened here? How has it affected the news media? Well, pretty obviously, it has meant that the traditional form of news media that has been the masthead of what we call the fourth estate, that is, institutions which seek to hold governments accountable to report to the general public on major events which are occurring in our society. Newspapers are basically going down the gurgler. They're going down the gurgler because they are facing very stiff competition from news outlets, or ostensibly news outlets, that are online. Why are they facing this competition, and why are they losing? Well, they're losing for very straightforward economic reasons. One, if we look at costs, the costs of running newspapers are extremely high, especially fixed costs. That is, the costs of the printing presses, the factory, so to speak. They're very high relative to an online news source, which by comparison costs virtually nothing. Also, there's on the demand side, revenue. Demand is simply falling for newspapers. People seem to find more popular, the online versions of news. Their habits are changing. And once their habits have started to shift, it's very hard to turn back to older forms of behavior. So demand is falling, so revenue is falling for the newspapers, and their fixed costs are high. Which means if revenue is falling, fixed costs are high, your profits are being squeezed. And that's exactly what's happening with the newspapers. Their profits are being severely squeezed. At some point, the entrepreneurs and investors who stand behind these kinds of institutions will shift, and they will move towards some other markets which are more profitable. That might be in online news or somewhere else in the economy that is making profit. It's also the case that the newspapers are not just facing competition from local online news, they're also facing competition from overseas news outlets that are online. So this is an issue of, let's call it globalisation. It's an element of globalisation. This is where we have a technological innovation, the internet, which has been able to transcend political and economic boundaries, that has connected people and communities and societies, countries across the globe in ways which were previously not possible. So there's transactions between them that were previously not possible. This is part of globalisation. So the newspapers are not only facing competition from local online news, but they're also facing competition from overseas news in ways that they can't really prevent. So much for the economics. What are the implications of it? Well, the implications are, the most important implications, I think, are probably political. So one of the likely outcomes is a decrease in local content. Doesn't mean local content disappears, but a decrease in local content in news as overseas news outlets set up in Australia. They will provide some local content, but most of the content, in order to remain viable, will come from their home bases. Also, there's likely to be, unfortunately, an increase in the quotient of, let's call it, mindless drivel, which serves as kind of entertainment rather than news, but is often portrayed as news. This is unfortunate, but people seem to like mindless drivel. So there's not much to be done about that. It's unfortunate, though, because it does mean that it displaces the more expensive, critical, investigative news, journalism, and analysis that would be traditionally engaged with. And this is important because, obviously, for a functioning democracy, it's necessary for the government of the day to be held to account or to be held responsible for its actions. And one of the ways in which that occurs is by there being transparency about its actions, and knowledge about its actions on the part of the populace who votes for them. Now, if that kind of investigative journalism is lost, then obviously it means that that fourth estate function of news media tends to diminish, and so the proper functioning of a democracy tends to be undermined. Basically, governments can do things that would not necessarily be acceptable to the demos who elects them under normal circumstances, but they can get away with it if they're not held to account. So there's serious political implications. But anyway, let's have a look at the item by the ABC.
Man beheads baby, licks up blood.
Naked man shot dead while eating teen's face.
This model plane is incredible.
Hello, I'm Paul Barry and welcome to Media Watch as we gaze into our crystal ball and peek into the future of print and online news. Those were three of the top stories earlier this month on what's now Australia's most popular news site, news.com.au. And here are a couple of others.
George Clooney kills off dad in latest prank.
18 signs you're dealing with a narcissist.
Busted! The celebs who've lied about their age.
They call this stuff clickbait, And it's what news sites all over the world are now using in their battle to sell advertising. They're forced into offering this fare, or so they believe, because they need to make money. And it's now almost impossible to do that from print.
Double-digit decline in newspaper circulation.
Yes, newspaper sales are plummeting again. Audit Bureau of Circulation figures for the last 3 months of 2013 show another huge fall, with Fairfax Media's The Age and Sydney Morning Herald down by a shocking 17% from the same period of 2012. News Corp's Herald Sun and Daily Telegraph fared slightly better, but still fell 12% after even bigger falls in the previous quarter. And how bad is that? As one former News Corp editor told Media Watch,
"It's slaughter."
Or in the words of another ex-News Corp executive who was equally shocked,
"It's a bloodbath. I've never seen figures like it."
in absolute terms, the Herald and Age are now selling not much more than 130,000 copies each a day. Meanwhile, the mighty Herald Sun has sunk below 400,000 and the Daily Telegraph below 300,000. The glory days are well and truly gone. But believe it or not, the news on advertising revenue is even worse, and that's where it really hurts. Fairfax Media's 2013 results show that print advertising revenue for its two big metro mastheads, the Herald and the Age, fell by 25% last financial year, almost exactly $100 million. Meanwhile, at News Corp, total revenue for their Australian papers was down by around $120 million in the last quarter, or 10% from the previous year. According to media analyst Roger Coleman,
It's a pretty poor outlook for the Fairfax Group and News Corp looking at the numbers in Australia.
that is an understatement. Insiders tell Media Watch that the Australian is losing $40 to $50 million a year. The Daily Telegraph is also losing money, and even Brisbane's Courier Mail, which was once a goldmine, has hit hard times. 6 or 7 years ago, News Corp's Queensland papers, which include the Gold Coast Bulletin, Cairns Post and Townsville Bulletin, were making $270 million profit before interest and tax. This year, we're told, they're budgeted to make less than 1/10 of that and are in fact on track for a loss. According to Coleman, this is the new reality.
Print product is unprofitable Monday to Friday. Commercially, the newspaper has ceased to exist, other than as a magazine on the weekends.
As profits at the Australian newspapers evaporated last year, 5 News Corp editors got the chop. And Kim Williams, the new CEO, resigned. One former News Corp executive tells Media Watch,
Kim Williams wanted to change, but the old guard knocked him off.
now it's not clear what News Corp's strategy will be. In the words of another former News Corp exec,
"The business is heading towards the cliff. At least Kim was trying to grab the wheel. Now they're heading to the edge with their foot flat to the floor and hoping for a soft landing."
over at Fairfax, the Herald, the Age and the Fin Review are also fighting for their lives, despite drastic cost-cutting over the last 2 years. Fairfax has shed some 2,000 jobs, announced the closure of its 2 biggest printing plants, shut down magazines, moved to a tabloid format, and got rid of some of its best-known writers. On the plus side, the Age and Herald have also put up paywalls on their popular websites with some success, and CEO Greg Hywood maintains it's all going fine.
I've been here since 1976, and let me say that our journalism has never been better. In this company, at this time, everyone is hungry to succeed.
But the share price still tells a sorry tale. At around 72 cents, which is admittedly higher than it has been, Fairfax Media is worth only 1/7 of what it was worth 7 years ago. And where has the value gone? To the new online sites that hijacked its advertising. As former Fairfax advisor Daniel Petrie told Colleen Ryan for her book Fairfax, The Rise and Fall,
$8 billion of market cap is now tied up in realestate.com.au, car sales and Seek. That has basically come out of Fairfax. And Fairfax is worth $1.3 billion. That is the scale of the tragedy.
ultimately it's the loss of advertising that poses the main problem for these newspapers, especially if it continues, because that's where so much of their money still comes from. And this is true at News Corp too, even though it owns realestate.com.au, because its tabloid papers risk losing the display ads they still rely on. As a former executive admitted,
Everyone knows the classifieds are gone. The big worry is the big retailers' ads. They know what customers want to buy and they can marry it up, and they're not going to need newspapers at all in a few years.
Compounding this is the difficulty newspapers have in making money online. More and more advertisers are spending their money with Google and Facebook because they can target their customers. And even if ad volume is going up, ad rates are going down. Last year, Fairfax's digital ad revenue rose by only $5.5 million, while its print ad revenue fell $100 million, or almost 20 times as much. To cap it all, big international media groups are now muscling in on our market. Britain's Guardian launched an Australian website in May last year, and it's now a regular in the top 10. The Daily Mail is also now here and whizzing up the charts with stories like this.
Now that's a tandoori tan. Jackie O tweets orange face after losing spray tan bingo.
The Mail Online is the most popular English language news site in the world, with an audience of 58 million people per month and a very particular approach to news.
Looming on the horizon, the precarious privy perching over a 2,600-metre Siberian cliff and frequented by the brave, stupid or very desperate.
The Mail is famous for its kooky stories and crazy headlines, which are designed to be picked up by online search engines. It's also notorious for the so-called sidebar of shame, packed with celebrity gossip and wardrobe malfunctions, which publisher Martin Clark says will certainly be coming our way.
We don't call it the sidebar of shame, but yeah, obviously the right rail with its great showbiz content, yes, that will definitely be there, but with an awful lot more Australian personalities.
The Mail, which has formed a joint venture with Nine Entertainment, is looking to hire 50 local journalists to bring us truly Australian content. So, what will it look like? Well, here's an example of what to expect.
3 Aborigine boys airlifted to hospital after circumcision ritual goes horrifically wrong and they are left sitting in pools of blood.
That story came with a totally unrelated picture that looks like it came from a tourist brochure.
A family of Aboriginals strolling in the wild near Darwin, Australia.
But once the Mail gets its bearings, it's expecting to take Australia by storm. Here's Martin Clark again.
My view on life is there's not much point going into races where you want to come second. So yeah, I mean, we have a massive market penetration in the UK and a very dominant position. We're expanding our position in the US all the time, and I see no reason why we shouldn't become a very big player in Australia.
Industry insiders say the Mail is already scaring the bejesus out of its competitors, like news.com.au. And they are running more and more man bites dog stories in an attempt to fight back.
Let's see what's trending online this morning. Alison Stevenson joins us from news.com.au. Good morning, Ali. What are people looking at today?
Good morning, guys. I've got a bit of an odd one for you today. A woman who hated being named Sheila and said that her name was one of the ugliest out there has legally changed her first name to Sexy. 41-year-old Sheila Crabtree from Ohio told the courthouse she wanted a name that reflected her personality.
Sexy Crabtree. What's not to like about a story like that? Well, one of our viewers, who's on news.com.au's daily email list, has complained to Media Watch about the stuff that now lands in his inbox, like this batch last Wednesday.
Son, 16, killed mum with dumbbell.
America's sweetheart is a bit.
Woman's fury over mile-high sex snub.
Says James, our informant.
This email paper is continually full of such rubbish, undoubtedly picked up from the international wires. It smacks of laziness on the part of reporters and perhaps says something of the audience. Tech smart but socially dumb. Avoids the paper grappling with the real issues of our Australian community.
But media websites like news.com.au have yet another new kid on the block to fight. The internationally renowned BuzzFeed launched here in Australia just over 2 weeks ago with a barrage of lists that you really don't need to read.
50 reasons why Australia is the lucky country.
12 things you may not know about the movie Wolf Creek.
31 heartwarming photos of animals returning home after bushfire evacuations.
Oh, all right. Let's have a look. Heartwarming, isn't it? BuzzFeed, of course, is a massive success, with a worldwide audience of 43 million people per month, almost as many as the Mail Online, and which grew by 76% last year. Famous for its cute cat videos and its lists, BuzzFeed creates content that people want to share, mainly young people and mainly on Facebook. These include sponsored stories, co-written by BuzzFeed, which advertisers love because they can pay by results when their message is shared. BuzzFeed now wants to be seen as a serious news site, and in America it's hiring political, business and investigative reporters. But it's taking on just 3 journalists in Australia to cover our news and to look for little furry animals.
Americans love cute cats. This is a true thing. Maybe in Australia it's going to be quokkas or some other cute animal.
Some of BuzzFeed's stories do have serious intent, like this one.
7 ways the ABC could be more on Australia's side.
No. But even then, it's more like comment or comedy. So is any of what BuzzFeed does really news or journalism?
That's an excellent question. I would say that List of Cats can be journalism. Certainly we have reporters and writers at BuzzFeed who are very traditional journalists in most sense. They go into the world and get new information. The way that they present it, though, is varied, and sometimes a List of Cats is a great way to tell a story. It depends on what point it is that you're trying to get across.
Journalism or not, BuzzFeed will be trying to steal readers from the big Australian news sites, and so will the Mail Online. This will put those sites under pressure to be more sensational, more celebrity-focused, and less interested in real news. BuzzFeed and the Mail Online will also steal advertising dollars from those established Australian sites and make it even harder for them to make a living. Indeed, some believe the globalisation of Australian news will drive the locals out of business and leave us with franchises of international media brands, says Roger Coleman.
It's hard to see independent, standalone businesses like the Sydney Morning Herald, Daily Telegraph and The Age surviving the onslaught.
We hope that is too pessimistic. And with smaller startups like the New Daily, launched in November, and the Saturday paper, due out in March, it's certainly not all doom and gloom. In fact, some say these are exciting times in journalism, especially if you like cat stories. And you can read more about all of this on our website, where you can also read a transcript and download the programme. You can also send us tips to that website and contact me or MediaWatch on Twitter. But for now, that is all from us. Goodbye.